B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Wednesday, March 21st, 2018. On the coasts, we've got storm conditions. It's another nor'easter in the northeast. And a Pineapple Express has hit California with the prospects of more flooding in the fire-ravaged areas near Santa Barbara. And I don't usually comment on the weather and things like that because people listen to podcasts at different times, and it might be a week from now, and you say, what? It's not. We don't got a nor'easter today. So I do understand, but I think there are a lot of people who are kind of hunkered down today and maybe even watching C-SPAN to see our government in action. And that's one word, inaction. Because the United States Senate yesterday, in a debate that was driven by Senators Bernie Sanders and Republican Mike Lee, they debated whether the Senate should take up one of its most important duties or continue to evade it. And that is weighing in on war powers related to the ongoing conflict in Yemen. This debate occurred as the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the guy who is driving the war against Yemen, with daily bombing raids that kill innocent civilians, a cholera epidemic that threatens millions. And Trump congratulated MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, who is the effective ruler of Saudi Arabia, for being a great customer of U.S. arms corporations. Now, isn't that lovely? The Senate is debating war powers, and Trump hosts the Saudi prince at the White House and says, hey, thanks for your business. Can we sell you some more cluster bombs? What else do you need? And while I commend many members of the Senate who recognize that they have been dodging their duty to debate and to authorize or restrict the war powers of the president, they didn't do it for Obama. He treated Yemen like a shooting gallery. And now that Trump is given the nuclear codes, Congress simply gives him the money, but does not authorize or restrict his war powers in any meaningful way. So yesterday they needed to get to 60 votes to debate the resolution, and then only a simple majority was required to pass it. There were 10 Democrats who voted to kill the resolution. And if only 5 of them had switched their votes, the resolution itself would have faced a vote. And let's name the 10 Democrats who got in the way of this. Christopher Coons, Catherine Cortez Masto, Joe Donnelly, Heidi Heitkamp, Doug Jones, Joe Manchin, Robert Menendez, Bill Nelson, Jack Reed, and Sheldon Whitehouse. These people pulled a punch. And consider the partisanship aspect of this. It would be easy for these Democrats to say, hey, it's Trump's war. Let's vote on it. But instead, they prefer the vague status quo and the lame claim that the resolution passed after 9/11, the authorization for use of military force against al-Qaeda, somehow can be claimed to authorize the current U.S. role in Yemen. Now, there's some remnants of al-Qaeda there, but they had no connection to the group that allegedly attacked us on 9/11. They weren't even formed for almost 10 years after 9/11. And Bernie Sanders got into a tiff with Bob Corker, who chairs the Foreign Relations Committee, and he said, hey, we don't need this vote. This is the work of my committee. And I'm going to hold a hearing about Yemen real soon. And Sanders said, I say to my good friend Senator Corker, this war has been going for 3 years. 10,000 civilians in Yemen are dead. 40,000 have been wounded. 1 million are dealing with cholera now. Millions have been displaced. And you come tonight on the floor and say you're going to have a hearing. That's good. But it's 3 years too late. And so I deplore the vote by these senators and the ongoing denial of responsibility by members of the House and Senate when it comes to war powers. Certainly some of them got burned over the invasion of Iraq 15 years ago this month. But they are evading one of their principal responsibilities. And I object. Citizens of Israel awoke today to headlines and TV coverage acknowledging that it was the state of Israel that attacked Syria and bombed what was believed to be the site of a nuclear reactor under construction in Syria about 10 years ago, 11 actually, September 6th of 2007. Now, this is not news in the United States. In George W. Bush's memoir, he wrote about it. That was 8 years ago in 2010. But Israel had barred the media in Israel from reporting it until now. And the news organizations were battling the government to lift that ban. It turns out that Ehud Olmert, the disgraced former prime minister who authorized that raid, he's got a book coming out. And because it was going to become public anyway, the government decided to confirm the event and to take it one step further, to threaten Iran. They trotted out the military chief of staff, Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot. He issued a statement warning Israel's enemies it will not allow the establishment of capabilities that threaten Israel's existence. And what that says is we've got nukes and nobody else in this region can have them. Because we're the good guys. You can count on us. But Iran, they're evil, authoritarian theocrats, and they're Muslim. So as you may know, Olmert resigned in disgrace back in 2008, spent 16 months in jail. I guess the book is some sort of effort at rehabilitation. And this produced an internal debate because Ehud Barak, who was the defense minister under Ehud Olmert, he says that he deserves more credit. He was the cool head at the time. He said that Olmert and others rushed the job, but they say that Barak only wanted to delay it so that he could carry out the strike himself after Olmert went to prison. So I can't account for the ego struggle there. But the military intelligence chief back at the time of the raid told reporters today that Israel has had only the vaguest idea what was happening until months before the attack. And so this also exposes what may have been an intelligence failure on the part of the Israelis. Will they acknowledge that and deal with it? I don't know. So another Israeli top government official, intelligence minister Israel Katz, also made an explicit warning to Iran. The courageous decision of the Israeli government almost 11 years ago to destroy the nuclear reactor in Syria and the successful operation following it sends a clear message. Israel will never allow nuclear weapons to countries like Iran who threaten its existence. Today I'm releasing an in-depth interview that many listeners have asked for a long time. Alison Weir is a long time. She's devoted 17 years on a personal quest to try to find peace in the Middle East. She founded the organization If Americans Knew, and she is the president of the Council for the National Interest, a group that was started a long time ago by my buddy Pete McCloskey and his former congressional colleague, Congressman Paul Findley. And in our in-depth interview, Alison Weir expands on an article she recently published about the massive information management and propaganda operation run by the State of Israel. It involves school children, students at the university level. It involves soldiers. It involves the foreign ministry. Tens of millions of dollars a year are devoted to trying to scrub information that Israel finds inconvenient and replace it with their own spin or propaganda. And Weir's odyssey started when YouTube took down videos of the If Americans Knew YouTube channel after unspecified complaints that they were somehow promoting hate. But these were videos about Palestinians who've been injured in brutal exchanges with Israeli soldiers. In this excerpt from my in-depth interview with Alison Weir, she talks about how orders are dispatched from Israel to Americans who volunteer at Jewish community centers to be part of this operation. And they change postings on Wikipedia. They get involved in trolling of social media sites. Here's that excerpt. Alison Weir.
This is, quite disturbing to read about what's going on. And they talk about specifically, an organizer says, when you work together, you can be incredibly powerful in the social media landscape. So these are missions that are being directed by the Israeli military in Israel. They're sending out missions that people in some Jewish community centers, specifically, we know now, in New Jersey there's one coming up in Manhattan. The Jewish Philanthropies of Boston host a media room to do this, where users will carry out missions assigned to them by Israel. They are specifically looking for both senior citizens and teenagers. One of these Israeli articles wrote that the Israeli military, in fact, the Israeli military stated this, that they are scouring Jewish communities for internet geniuses, for prodigies that they can use on behalf of Israeli propaganda.
I invite you to listen to the full interview with Alison Weir. It's under an hour long, and we cover a lot of interesting aspects of Israel's information management system and the extent to which it fails to register as a foreign agent under American law. It's quite a conversation, and I hope you will check it out. It's available for the next 14 days to my subscribers, people like Patrick Garay, Sandra Fish, and Chris Stubblefield. They've just both renewed their annual subscriptions, just like Terry Paris, who has multiple subscriptions. So I'm grateful to these generous people, and I invite you to join them. Come on over to peterbcollins.com, find the menu tab, click on that. When you pull it down, you click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page, and it's easy to make a choice, $5, $10, $20 a month, or our $50 annual subscription. I've had some cancellations recently, and I don't try to guilt people. You're free to cancel whenever you wish. But I feel it in the pocketbook, and revenues are down a little bit, so I'd like you to help out if you're in a position to do that. And I don't want your Social Security money if you're living on a limited budget. You may ignore my pleas. But anybody who can afford hipster coffee, you can afford $5 a month for the PBC podcast. Also in the Middle East, Turkey is having some success as it takes on the Kurdish militia groups that the U.S. has relied upon so heavily in the war in Syria against Assad and against the so-called Islamic State. So the Turkish troops have taken a critical town called Afrin, and they are moving on Manbij. These are along the Syrian border with Turkey. And there are U.S. troops in Manbij. They are stationed there with Syrian Kurdish forces. And this could wind up as an unexpected showdown between the United States and Turkey. And there are also some rumors abounding that Russian and Syrian forces are preparing for a larger military presence from the United States. We have no confirmation of that on these shores, but I have seen those rumors circulating. So this is something we have to keep an eye on. The corporate media in this country has not deployed reporters and teams, I think, sufficient to cover these important issues. And so we are left with fragmentary reports and rumors, unfortunately. So yesterday, Donald Trump made a call to Moscow. And he spoke to Vladimir Putin, who won re-election on Sunday, with a reported 76% of the vote. And Trump was given talking points, which included ask about the events in England with the alleged use of a nerve agent on a former Russian double agent, and be sure not to congratulate him for winning his election. So we are told through a very high-level leak, most likely somebody at the National Security Council, that Trump ignored those talking points, and as he spoke to Putin, the first thing he did was congratulate him on winning re-election. Then he started talking about setting up a meeting with Putin in the near future. And Trump even alluded to the idea of talking to Putin about arms control negotiations. But the big story that has dominated is that we have a leaker who revealed that Trump didn't stick to the talking points. And while I think that is interesting and it helps us understand this guy who got into the White House, I view it as two illegitimate leaders who had a casual conversation. And Trump couldn't help congratulating Putin on managing an extension of his term. And I think in turn, he imagined that Trump receives respect from Putin for his manipulation of our election process that thrust him into the White House and has left us stuck with him. So, and it's true that in the past, both Obama and Bush called to congratulate Putin after his election victories. The Washington Post, which was the recipient of the high-level leak from the White House, also mustered a second story by national security reporter Paul Son. And this is the more substantive piece. Trump's pledge to pursue arms control talks with Russia offers a remote chance that the two leaders could revive Cold War-era pacts that have broken down steadily in recent years. And we do have an arms race underway. The U.S. initiated it with the Nuclear Posture Review, the NPR, that was issued in late January or early February, and Trump's pledge to spend at least $1 trillion based on Obama's plan, or expanding it, to rebuild our nuclear arsenal over the next 30 years. As you know, on March 1st, Putin gave a speech with some bad videos claiming that he has a nuclear-propelled cruise missile, an underwater nuclear drone, and other next-generation weapons that can defeat the missile defense that is mostly a charade anyway. So this is interesting language from the Post. Quote, some interpreted Putin's show as a veiled-in treaty for new arms control negotiations with the United States. Well, he wasn't veiled about it at all. He was very direct. And he said that he wants to sit down with the United States and re-engage in the ABM, the anti-ballistic missile treaty that we walked away from in 2002. So beyond all the bullshit and the leaks and the purported anger of the White House or the president, this is, beneath all that, a promising development. Now, as a result of the massive leaks, Trump has been trying to get key staffers in the White House to sign non-disclosure agreements. And one of the drafts that a news agency has seen included a penalty of up to $10 million for a staffer who violates that. Now, maybe Jared Kushner and a few other of the millionaires or billionaires, I guess Wilbur Ross, could afford to pay a $10 million fine for leaking. That is just so over the top and outrageous. And it appears to be a violation of federal law to require employees of the government to sign these kinds of agreements. But it shows how paranoid and controlling Trump is. And I guess he's just got a lot of liabilities out there that he's got to try to keep zipped up. And we know that there are 3 women who desperately want to tell their stories. Stormy Daniels was supposed to be on 60 Minutes the past 2 Sundays, and CBS is now saying they will run the interview coming up this Sunday. We shall see, because I think that the lawyers are working very hard to prevent that. Well, I've avoided talking about this because, we don't have many details on the budget deal that is pending in Washington. We have the prospect of another government shutdown at midnight this Friday if the House and Senate don't come to an understanding. And the leadership is once again excluding the committee members. You can't pass amendments to this bill. Nobody has read it yet because it's not finished, and they're going to try to rush a vote on it as soon as tomorrow in the House. The outlines that we know about is they're pushing out $380 million for new voting machine and cybersecurity for elections via the Election Assistance Commission. The FBI is going to get an extra $300 million in counterintelligence funding to combat Russian hacking? Huh? What about the Cyber Command? Aren't they in charge of hacking? Also, there's a battle over funding for bridges or actually tunnels, rail tunnels, to replace the tunnel under the Hudson River between New Jersey and Manhattan. And this is purely political. Chris Christie blocked it for several years. Now it's back on track. But Trump doesn't want to deliver something that would be seen as a victory for New York Senator and Democratic leader Chuck Schumer. Now, this is a pretty critical piece of infrastructure, and it's really sad to see them battling over it. The other infrastructure item that Trump wants is money for the wall, capital T, capital W. And the compromise so far, we're told, is that there will be $1.6 billion available for, quote, physical barriers along the Mexican border. But the funding can only be used for repairs or for secondary barriers along border stretches where there is already a wall. The rest can be used for 33 miles of new barriers, but there are restrictions on the type. Only levees or existing bollard fencing can be built rather than the concrete prototypes that Trump was fawning over in the photo op near San Diego last week. So the bill rejects a Trump request for more immigration enforcement officers and an increase in funding for immigrant prisons. And here's one of the things that just flies in the face of all of this talk about the wall. A story from the public television station in San Diego. Over the last 2 months, the U.S. Coast Guard has seized nearly $500 million worth of cocaine. That's the street value of more than 5,100 pounds. It's been interdicted in 4 incidents on the high seas between February and early March. And they seized the drugs in the areas off the coast of South America. So this is just a vivid example that you could build Trump's wall and even imagine that you can get it along the Rio Grande River and deal with all of the logistical headaches that it would require. The promise that he makes, and that's echoed by idiots like Ann Coulter, is that this will just stop cold the flow of drugs across our borders. And it's just bullshit. And it won't stop the flow of human beings either. They come on airplanes now. And the idea that everybody has a coyote and comes in overland is just ridiculous. And this is not only a blight on our border and on our reputation, but it's also a massive waste of American money. Now, one of the things about this spending bill is that people try to attach all kinds of ornaments to it. They call it a Christmas tree. And I'm sure Jennifer Briney at Congressional Dish is pulling her hair out, trying to keep track of all this stuff. But one of the things that we got a warning on yesterday from the ACLU is a thing called the Cloud Act. And it is at risk of being attached to this omnibus spending bill. And the ACLU says that the bill gives the executive branch dramatically more power. It would allow Attorney General Sessions to enter into agreements with foreign governments that bypass current law without any approval from Congress. And under these agreements, foreign governments would be able to get emails and other electronic information without any additional scrutiny by a U.S. judge or official. And the Attorney General would not need to consider a country's human rights record in terms of deciding who to share this information with. And there's more. The bill would allow for the first time foreign governments to wiretap in the United States, even in cases where they do not meet Wiretap Act standards. And that would give foreign governments the power to engage in surveillance, which could sweep in the information of Americans communicating with foreigners that the U.S. itself would not be able to engage in. It also allows broad discretion to funnel this information back to the U.S. So we're going to allow Mexico, or maybe the Dutch, to conduct surveillance in the United States, and then, because it would be illegal for our government to do it, they can share the illegal information they derive with the U.S. government. So this is a very serious issue. I appreciate the alert from the ACLU. A bit of bipartisanship broke out at the Senate Intelligence Committee yesterday as they gathered with a preliminary report on election security. And Republicans joined Democrats in denouncing the role of Russians. Susan Collins of Maine, quote, "The Russians were relentless in attempting to meddle in the 2016 elections. They will continue their efforts to undermine public confidence in Western democracies and in the legitimacy of our elections." The report recommends that every voting machine should have a voter-verified paper trail, no Wi-Fi capability, and some of this is common sense. That people like me and Brad Friedman and other election integrity activists, I think of Wasserman and Harvey Wasserman and Bob Fitrakis in Columbus, Ohio, we have been calling for the simple use of hand-counted paper ballots for years. And it's a simple solution. I don't think it needs $300 or $400 million in taxpayer funding. And Greg Palast checks in with an email. He said that, this Cambridge Analytica piece, he said the story is that, let's see. He says, the story is that Cambridge Analytica, once directed by Steve Bannon, by shoplifting Facebook profiles to bend your brain, is some unique bad apple of the cyber world. That's a dangerously narrow view. In fact, the dark art of dynamic psychometric manipulation in politics was not pioneered by Cambridge Analytica for Trump, but by I-360 Themis, the operation founded by the Koch brothers, and with Karl Rove at the controls. And this is very sophisticated stuff. In his film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, he has an expert who describes I-360 as dynamically tracking you on 1,800 behaviors. Or, as he put it, they know the last time you downloaded porn and whether you ordered Chinese food before you voted. So the Koch operation and its competitor called Data Trust use your credit card purchases, cable TV choices, other personal information that Palast says is far more revealing than your Facebook profile. And he says Data Trust is operated by Karl Rove. Oh, I got that wrong, and I attributed Rove to the Koch brother operation. But he's involved with Data Trust, which is funded by Paul Singer, the far-right financier better known as the Vulture. So this is a pretty interesting perspective here, because I do think that the use of Facebook data by Cambridge Analytica is quite problematic. The cover-up by Facebook and the stonewalling, I think, compounds the problem and puts it into a very dangerous area for Facebook. I also want to point out that the Obama team perfected voter profiling and developing data using social media on voters who they could turn out for Obama. So not all of this is as nefarious as it's made out to be. But the operation of Cambridge offshore and many other factors do make it, I think, a very important story at the moment. The primaries are getting underway. Illinois held theirs yesterday. Dan Lipinski, the very conservative Democrat who is against abortion rights and votes with the Republicans way too often, he eked out a victory over his progressive challenger. I don't have her first name, but Marie Newman. And it was a very narrow victory, 51 to 49%. And in the land of Lincoln, Democratic voters chose a billionaire, J.B. Pritzker, to challenge the incumbent Republican governor, a mere millionaire named Bruce Rauner. And it's fascinating to see that Pritzker, who is an heir to the Hyatt Hotel fortune, and I believe he is the sister of Penny Pritzker, who was Obama's Commerce Secretary and a major funder of Obama's political campaigns. He has put almost $70 million of his own money into the campaign. The second largest donor is the Teachers Union, the Illinois Education Association, that put in just under $15,000. So he didn't need to hold any fundraisers or get $28 in social media. Jay Pritzker reportedly put about $200,000 per day into his campaign. Good news from Montana. One of the valve turners went to be sentenced yesterday. His name is Leonard Higgins. You'll recall that in a coordinated effort, Higgins and other people, including Michael Foster, who was interviewed on this program. Foster was sent to prison in North Dakota for at least a year, and an additional 2 years was suspended. But Leonard Higgins got no jail time and was ordered to provide about $3,700 in restitution. Now, the actual cost of the damage that he did when he shut down a valve on a pipeline in Montana run by Enbridge at a place called Coal Banks Landing was somewhere in the neighborhood of $938. The judge, however, was pretty fair-minded and even-handed. He said that it was Higgins' first offense. It was nonviolent. Higgins didn't personally gain from what he did. He said he's 65 years old, so he imposed a 3-year deferred jail sentence that won't be served as long as Higgins cooperates on probation, and the felony will be wiped at the end of that time. We have news from Austin, Texas this morning that a man suspected of being at least one of the bombers, the package bombs, and then the tripwire bomb most recently. He was being closed in on by the cops, and he allegedly or reportedly blew himself up in his vehicle as the officers got closer. He's identified as a 23-year-old white man, Mark Anthony Condit, and the police say they don't know what his motivation was. They warn that there could be other bombs out there that haven't yet detonated. They talked to his parents and roommates. He had been to community college but didn't graduate. And he is described as somebody who was fairly conservative. He opposed same-sex marriage, abortions, supported the death penalty, and described himself as a conservative. But so far, no links to any white supremacist organizations. And finally today, the Me Too movement has gone way, way back into the Wayback Machine, to the 1970s. You remember the TV show Mork and Mindy, starring Robin Williams and Pam Dauber as Mindy? Well, in a new book about Williams, Pam Dauber is quoted as saying, "I had the grossest things done to me by him, and I never took offense. I mean, I was flashed, humped, bumped, grabbed. I think he probably did it to a lot of people, but it was so much fun." The new book is a biography of Williams by journalist Dave Itzkoff. It'll be published in May. And he has a longer quote from Mindy. "If you put it on paper, you would be appalled. But somehow he had this guileless little thing that he would do, those sparkly eyes. He'd look at you, really playful, like a puppy, all of a sudden. And then he'd grab your tits and then run away. And somehow he could get away with it. It was the 70s, after all." And the show's producer, Gary Marshall, also recalled, he would take all his clothes off, he would be standing there totally naked, and she was trying to act. His aim in life was to make Pam Dauber blush. Well, Robin, you made a lot of people blush. Every time I saw him perform, my cheeks would ache for at least a day or two as I recovered from laughing so hard. And while I don't condone his behavior, it was a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. We give it away free. You're invited to share it far and wide. It's also on YouTube, and if you listen there, please click the subscribe button. It won't cost you anything. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling